One of the things I was going to mention to you is how struck I was by the program cover of the photo of the Salvation Army fellow with his leather bag and the family, obviously assisting people. And that image of the church is like an image that doesn't immediately come to my mind when I think of the church. You can imagine if this was a Catholic setting, it would look a little different. And it begs the question to me that takes us back to the start of this. In his commencement address for the graduating class of 2005 at Kenyon College, the celebrated novelist David Foster Wallace told this very simple story, and you may well have heard it since then. There's these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on a bit, and eventually one of them looks at the other and goes, "What the hell's water?" So how often have we just been swimming along, going with the tide, almost oblivious to the deeper things that we're involved with, until something or someone pulls us up and makes us stop, take stock, and become more savvy about the world in which we live. Today's question, where's the faith, in faith-based agencies, is doing just that. It's easy to become complacent with regard to the social status of faith-based social services. We run the risk of making an uncritical claim that we are doing essential good works, that everyone wants them, and that our efforts are widely applauded. We can be numb to the emerging turbulence in which we conduct our ministries. So I thought originally I was going to do a few things in this talk, but I might touch on a couple of them anyway. And the first comes from part of the learning for me being so intensely involved with the Royal Commission. But then the second comes from what I sense is a paradigm shift that's occurred for churches in our world, in our society, particularly as we engage with governments, particularly when a lot of our services are basically government funded. So when we put the question, where is faith and faith-based social service agencies, you can approach it in many ways, but for me the simplest answer is we need to focus on the culture of those agencies and their church sponsors. For not only will this highlight the life of the organisations, it'll throw some light on how faith-based groups are being perceived by the public and government regulators. So what do we understand by organisational culture? Unlike Patricia, I had to make up this one myself. I couldn't go to whatever it's called, chat, whatever. So in brief, how organisational culture basically means how a organisation behaves, what it claims to value, and the founding stories that motivate and inspire its development. This in turn constitutes the organisation's character, ethos, and agency in the world. The degree to which Christian faith is overtly at the core of the organisation's culture, where it can nurture, inspire, and direct the life of that organisation, will be the degree to which that organisation behaves and is seen to behave consistently in accordance with the tenets of Christianity and the Spirit of God. Because this is what grounds the integrity and identity of the faith-based organisation. My most intense experience around this, of course, was with the blatant hypocrisy made manifest through the clerical sex abuse of children in the Catholic Church. To say that I was shell-shocked was an understatement. I'd been involved with the Catholic Church in many manifestations for a long time. And when I was asked to do this job, I was at that stage the Secretary General of the Federal AMA and was rung up by the then President of the Bishops' Conference, a person who I hadn't spoken to for about 7 years. The last time I spoke to that person, I was in a job running Catholic Health Australia. And I remember that he was ringing me about a favour. And we finished the conversation. And when we were finishing, I said, "Oh, well, have a good evening, Dennis." And he said, "Francis, it's your grace." So 7 years later, when I get the phone call, and it was the same person, I immediately picked up the phone and said, "Good evening, Your Grace. Some things never change." And that is part of the problem. Some things never change. Because the deliberate concealment of crimes, the manipulation of the truth, the lying and obfuscation by senior religious leaders and bishops, and the harsh treatment of victims and their families undermined my confidence in the institution called the Catholic Church. The findings of the Royal Commission castigated the moral leadership of the Church and revealed the expediency of its administration, whereby the interests of the institution were placed before the welfare of children and the interests of victims. Although many church leaders pleaded forgiveness and understanding at the Royal Commission, and even committed to major reforms within the institution, there has been very little to no substantial change to the significant cultural and church practices identified by the Royal Commission as pathways for reform. The inertia of the institution, arrogant in the extreme, simply waits out its critics. Part of that arrogance lies in its belief that the nature and life of the Church is not of this world, and outsiders fail to grasp the essence of its mystical nature as the body of Christ. Therefore, what the Royal Commission took for reform, for example, the obligatory reporting of information about child sex offences revealed in the confessional, was claimed by church leaders to be ignorant of the nature of the sacrament. So the bishops and the Vatican resisted any calls for reform in that area. What the community has not failed to recognise, although, is the lack of integrity and authenticity the institution brought to its dealings. The Church has debased its moral authority, and it has undermined its presence of prioritising the dignity of the innocent. Overall, the instinct of the institution is to be defensive and risk-averse. It wants to move on from the scandal, to assign it to history, even though it contends with how that history is understood. It wants to promote its good works in the vain hope that it can restore its credibility to a new generation of less critical adherents. interesting, promoting its good works for one reason only: to promote the interests of the institution. So as it stands, however, the revelations of the Royal Commission about the Catholic Church have tainted all of its services and corroded the trust and faith that the community and in turn government regulators place, not only in the institutional aspects of the Church, but also in the Church's services across health, education and community services. Whether they're hospitals, aged care homes, schools or community-based social services, the organisations are typical of other faith-based agencies operating in secular settings. Their staff come from various faith backgrounds and none. Their mission is to continue the traditions of their founders, and in my case, that's the Sisters of Mercy, in their contemporary social contexts. These organisations do not aim to proselytise, rather they aim to make real the gospel imperatives, to heal the sick, clothe the naked, provide shelter, alleviate poverty. Under the masthead of being Catholic organisations, we aim to be inclusive and welcoming for both staff and clientele. Our theological approach is practical and accommodating. Our purpose is to provide reliable and quality service, oriented on the community's benefit and devoid of any hint of discrimination or entitlement. In other words, we actively seek to promote and nurture organisational cultures that are consistent with the spirit of the gospel as we prayerfully reflect on it in situ. Now, I find that approach liberating because it encourages us to have confidence in our faith journey, to trust our prayerful reflection on the Gospels, and to work in close cooperation with all levels of church governance whilst maintaining our distinctive place and identity within the broader church. All that said, the revelations of the Royal Commission hang heavily on the reputation of Catholic services and the faith the wider community places in them. In our postmodern society, formal religious affiliation and practice are in decline, as is adherence to church teachings. The credibility and relevance of religion is waning. The alignment of the mainstream churches with social conservative cultural positions, like opposition to same-sex marriage, is unpopular. Tensions in church-state relations are more overt, particularly in issues of employment, access to public funding for faith-based services, and the taxation treatment of charitable works. And as I mentioned previously, it's easy to be complacent with regard to the social status of our services because we always claim we're doing what's right, what's good, and what's essential in our eyes. But I'd put it to you, the environment of sophisticated state provision of social services is laying big challenges on how essential are the contributions by faith-based groups, especially when their faith base becomes problematic or indistinguishable. Over the years, there have been many issues where Catholic organisations, like hospital groups, have been in partnerships with government. They've basically pertained to funding and service planning, although in recent times they've been impinged upon employment practices, labour relations, ethical standards, and even the acceptance of Catholic organisations as a public provider. In all cases, the issues called for mutual respect and acknowledgement of what the partnerships seek to deliver within the confines of what can still be best described as a liberal society. In this context, it's quite common to have policymakers, bureaucrats and politicians ask, what is so distinctive about faith-based organisations that they can be that self-determining and effectively exist on public funds? Or to put it more bluntly, if they take public funds, do they do what the state demands? Put either way, it begs the question, does faith bring a distinctive value to what would otherwise be a secular, public-funded service? Do religious social services have a legitimate place in a system that is otherwise government-controlled and provided? To what extent do governments have the right to determine what type and how the services are funded and how they are delivered by faith-based groups? I'll give you a couple of quick case studies from our side. As it was said, I'm involved with the Mater group of hospitals. That's 11 hospitals. 4 of them are major teaching hospitals, of note. We've been, as Patricia said, we have been confronted in both Queensland and Victoria with legislation about voluntary assisted dying. The official church position is pretty clear. You'd have to have your head in the sand to think, oh yeah, the Catholics are big on euthanasia. However, when it is the law of the land, where do you sit as a public provider? So we've worked that through, and where our homes, our aged care homes that we own, hopefully we instill a Catholic ethos in, where a resident there seeks voluntary assisted dying, we permit the doctor and support staff to come into the home and perform the treatment. In the old days, there would have been this brick wall up in front of the home. There would have been no, no, no. But I think in many ways, since the Royal Commission, there is at least a wake-up about the arrogance of the institution. There is a way that these things can be accommodated even though they may not be part of the lexicon of your belief system. There's a way in which you can still journey with people, accompany people, which is the words of our Pope, accompany people, get involved in the mess of life, be the field hospital, not the bastion. There are ways in which it can be progressed. We're now being confronted in our hospital systems with the issue about the lack of access to termination and contraception services. The hospital group that I run is the largest public obstetric and gynaecology hospital in the Southern Hemisphere. We deliver more babies than any other hospital in the country. So you can see this is an acute issue. And it's my sense that the No, No, No campaign won't win this one. There has to be a way through in the areas of contraception and tubal ligation when the issue is inconvenience to the patient. It's a different story, I'd have to tell you, on abortion and terminations. But we are needing to get creative, not arrogant. We are needing to demonstrate we listen. Within the Catholic tradition, there are many rules, as in spiritual practices. One that's very popular is the rule of St. Benedict. I don't expect you have read it. I haven't. I've only read the first page. And the first line on the first page and the first word of the first line says, listen. The sign of a church that's not arrogant is a sign of a church that listens. Listens deeply. Listens to what we understand are the whispers, the murmurs of the Spirit, the urgings, the instincts, the desire. These are the ways in which we discern our pathway. These are the ways in which we inherently connect with every human. And it's that spirit that proper Christian ethics is nourished by. And in our public debates, we need to be able to make our positions clear. We need to be articulate like that. Because sometimes we are not able to be everything for everybody. But what we can be for everybody every time is authentic and real. And that's when real respect returns. That's the key. Out of the Royal Commission, there were many, many, many dreadful stories. There's an agenda for change that some are manfully involved with. In the Catholic community, it spurned a desire for reform, for change, for the lay Catholics to step up and be adults, to take responsibility for themselves and their church, to say no more are we going to be in collective shame because of the way misguided bishops and leaders ran the show. It sounds like a Marxist revolution. It sort of is. And it's good. When you're over 60, to be involved in anything with energy is a positive. So, let me say in conclusion, where is the faith? For me, my personal experience is the faith only comes from staying with your own spiritual practice, being true to the practice that tries to ground you in deeper things. It's the same set of questions around what is a happy society, what is a good society, what is a place of healing. All the questions we keep asking ourselves as we confront our social issues are the same questions I confront myself as I try to grow up and wake up. Your own experiences help you wake up. Your determination helps you grow up, regardless if you're 60 or more. Thanks very much.